Thank you. And thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. I want to thank Chip and Sally. I don't know where they are. But it's been an honor to be a part of the AREI network for quite some time now, ever since I was in actually my early 20s. And I'm also very blessed to be a trustee. So thank you all for coming. And we have a really exciting conversation today. We're kind of we're in between, right, the generations. So we're going to talk a little bit about how our generation is moving the needle. And we wanted to start off quickly by asking folks in the room, just kind of popcorn, does anyone know what the youngest age of a millennial is? 22. There you go. How about the oldest? That's right, Hendrik. You're an honorary millennial. So roughly 37. So we were 1980s, 1990s, and we grew up in what many would call the age of information. So some call us digital natives. Actually, we've been called many things. We've been called the me generation. We've been called the 9/11 generation. We actually get a lot of flack in terms of terminology for what our generation is called. But the way I like to think about it is that we were born in the first chapter of the Anthropocene. So our parents, or our mothers, were kind of the first generation to be born in the Anthropocene, or the time when human beings touch every ecosystem on the planet. And with that comes tremendous burden and opportunity. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, with this amazing group of young people, including myself, about some of the solutions that we're embracing, how we're moving the needle, particularly across 3 themes. So we're going to focus a bit on entrepreneurship. We've talked quite a bit about activism here, and our generation is I won't speak for our entire generation, but we all talked quite a bit about what activism does, but we're thinking a lot about entrepreneurship, how you build enterprises, right, and how we're building the businesses of the future that will reflect the activism that we've heard so much about, as well as investment. Our generation is set to inherit anywhere between 30 and 50 trillion in the next several decades. It's a lot of capital, and how do we structure that? What does that look like? So we're going to talk a bit about that. And then we're also going to talk about civic engagement, which is a through line that I think we've talked quite a bit about throughout this summit, and what it means for our generation to get out and vote. So with that, Katie LaFleur is going to introduce herself a little bit and talk a bit about why she's engaged in impact in the work she does.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I want to start off by, we are sitting here today because of many of you in this room, for the decades of work that you do, that you are our mentors, you are our guide, you guide us, the decades of work that you've done allows us to do the work that we do today. So first and foremost, truly thank you. Really, thank you. So Matt describes kind of our generation as a way to describe it is we want to do well while doing good. And so we exited college right when the Great Recession was hitting. And so we entered a really tough job market. And we witnessed many people our parents' age lose their jobs to careers that they had dedicated their entire professional careers to. And so seeing and witnessing that you can fail at something that you don't love and that you're not passionate about really inspired in me and many in our generation that you might as well attempt to succeed at something that lights you up. And technology inflection points are massive wealth creation. So whether it's from the horse and buggy to the car or the landline to the cell phone, updating the world's infrastructure technology to the 21st century is the biggest investment opportunity of our lifetime. So UBS describes our generation as the most risk-adverse group since the Great Depression. So we hold 52% of our assets on average in cash, and we distrust typical equities. So kind of with a great distrust of the system, a real core to do well and do good in the world, and as Katie mentioned, over $30 trillion being distributed to our generation within the next 3 decades, it makes a pretty impactful group of investors. So I grew up in a family where my dad built and sold distressed asset management companies for financing commercial real estate portfolios. Really, really riveting stuff, let me tell you. And working there, I understood the financial world, and I got to see firsthand the value of making money, but it truly did not feed my soul. So, like any good rebel, I decided to move to Peru after college and become a volunteer. And I distinctly remember my dad sitting me down and saying, "You do know orphanages don't pay well, right? Like, you look at your lifestyle." And so it wasn't until coming back and finding the world of kind of using finances for good and investing along causes that I got to marry my two foundations of generating capital and doing good with it. So kind of back to Matt's theme of doing well and doing good at the same time. Matt, how did you get into this?
I was going to go a little bit into the personal, but we only have about 13 minutes. So I'm just going to state really quick what my Millennial Moonshot is, which is what the panel was first called. So I wrote that down, which we all thought is kind of a funny name anyways. But my Millennial Moonshot, the first one is that Millennials and Gen Z will have an 80% turnout rate at the 2020 election. And so I know you all are really so excited about the youth, and we are too, but I'll tell you why the millennials are so important for what's about to happen. So how I got to that point is I work for EarthX. You've seen us all around everywhere with our pins, et cetera. Please come next year in April. So anyways, for EarthX, I founded and run what's called the eCapital Summit, which is a clean tech investment summit for innovators, investors, ecosystem partners being incubators, accelerators, national labs, government. And then I also engage the government throughout the year, most notably the Department of Energy. And especially the last year, I've been talking to them about how can we address both early stage and late stage funding gaps. And so to address that, we had a whiteboarding session, Chatham House whiteboarding session at this year's EarthX in April. We brought together financiers from the biggest banks you could think of, the top investors from the entire US clean tech community, some of the best entrepreneurs from the US, and we sat down and go, okay, there's a problem. How do we address it in terms of getting more capital towards the companies that we all want to see succeed? And so out of that, I basically came to the realization that we have to have a comprehensive, coordinated federal response in order to get the solutions to market that we need in order to freaking save humanity in the next 10 years, period. If we don't, we are all screwed. Each and every one of us is sitting in this seat. We're all done for. So from that whiteboarding session, we had a working paper that came out of that. It got passed along to the White House. I ended up getting invited to the White House. I went, I smiled, I shook hands, very cordial. I'm a bipartisan guy. And walking out of the White House, I came to this realization of that this political leadership is not going to do it. And so that's what you're hearing here throughout our day is why we need new political leadership in 2020. And so from that, I started digging into the voter data and found that, here's a few data points, since we all like data. Basically, in 2020, Gen Z will be 18 to 23 years old. They will constitute 10% of all eligible voters. That's up from 4% during the midterms in 2018. Millennials will comprise, as you just heard on the last panel, about 27%. So when you add Gen X with these two groups, or 55 and under, that's 60% of all eligible voters versus 40%, which are boomers and older. And so there's one bright spot with all of this. In 2018, the millennial turnout for the midterms increased from 22% in 2014 to 42% in 2018. Gen X, or 55 and younger, had 62 million voters, whereas boomers and older were only 60 million. This is the first time that flipped. And that was the largest midterm turnout since 1914. And one other thing, too, is that over 70% of millennials and Gen Z say that climate change is personally important to them. So here we are. If you look at the time and the data and the situation that we're in, how millennials vote in 2020 will determine the fate of humanity. Does that scare you?
A lot of pressure, man.
And 2020, I believe, will prove to be the power of you. 2020 will prove to be will prove that your vote does count. And 2020 will prove that environment is not an issue, it is the freaking issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Matt and I and Katie, we're all part of a network called Nexus Global. So it's about 5,000 young people, and by young we call it under the age of 45, let's say, and anywhere from age 7 to 45, right? So we have multiple generations, and many of us are next-gen inheritors of wealth. Some entrepreneurs, but many do philanthropy and what we call impact investment. I think every investment has an impact. It's kind of a misnomer to call it impact investing. That's my personal opinion, but impact meaning that it's intentional, that we are seeking out investments that have a quantifiable impact. One thing that happened last year that it was quite fascinating to me. So we hosted during Jerry Brown's Global Climate Action Summit a very special event that was actually supported by the World Ethics and Leadership Foundation. So thank you to Well Foundation and all of the work that you do on intergenerational growth and how we work together. A conversation with a group called the Elders. So former presidents, heads of state, and we had this beautiful intergenerational dialogue about how we can really transition markets, transition community, and how we can work together. One thing that our group at Nexus did about a month prior is we did a call out to our network and we said, hey, okay, fill out this survey. It's completely confidential because we like to keep our members, private, of course. And what are you doing in terms of climate philanthropy, and what are you doing in terms of climate investment? And we had about 13 people respond, and just among those 13 people, about $1 billion totaled in investment and philanthropy. So we had some serious power behind this network, and our group was sitting there thinking to ourselves, well, how do we leverage the fact that we have a group of young people that want to leverage their assets and actually are going to be inheriting more assets, putting some of that to work? How do we actually build bridges with the next generation, the generation who has already done and structured some of the investment market that we already see? So I say that because one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and I want everybody to get out the vote. I think voting is really important. Obviously, I have strong opinions about who's in the White House and our administration right now, and globally. I do think how we vote with our dollars, how we structure our portfolios, how we invest is one of the most critical things that we can be thinking about, and it's often in a black box. So I stand here today saying that I've dedicated my entire career trying to figure out and crack the nut of building low carbon investment vehicles. We've created an entire new index that trades on the stock exchange, so per dollar invested, it's 80% less carbon. Ellen Dorsey's here, and she's will help build an entire movement, including young people, of churches, all across the board that are moving their capital out of the top 200 fossil fuel companies and helping build a marketplace for how we invest our money in positive solutions. And I think it's actually our generation that is now in the workplace, right? Like, we are no longer as much on the streets. We have the opportunity not just to vote, but to build companies. And we also have an opportunity to make investments as trustees of our families. And that's something that I know Katie can speak a little bit about with the investments that you've made and some of the work that you've done in that space.
Yeah. So we know that for every 1 degree of warming, our planet will pick up 7% more precipitation into the atmosphere. And so we know the state of our world, that there are more violent climate events like flooding, wildfires, category 3, 4, 5 hurricanes. This is our new climate normal, and everyone in this room has experienced this. And we also know that the solutions have already been identified. We don't need to go out and continue to look for them. It's three-pronged. The world invests $294 trillion a year privately, and we need to direct 1 to 2% of all investable assets every year into low-carbon infrastructure technologies, while we concurrently reforest our planet and stabilize our human population by investing in women and girls in developing nations. This is our solution. It's identified. Our question is, are we going to do it? Or what are we going to do about it? So I focus, we all know the timeline that we're up against, and so I focus on commercially viable technology today. So tech that is already in the marketplace working and that we're able to aggregate capital towards and scale. Because technology that works now is better than tomorrow. So the fund that I have found that I've invested in personally for multiple of their rounds is a company called Full Cycle. And they aggregate capital towards agriculture, waste to energy, desal plants, among others. And they focus only on technology that is making a large impact in reducing and balancing our carbon math, and that is commercially viable today. So one of their projects is called Sonova. It's a company that they invested in that is a waste to energy plant. And this plant operates at a municipality size scale. So globally, we throw away 1.7 billion tons of trash every year. And the World Bank tells us that this number is going to go up to 5 billion tons of trash per year thrown away within the next decade. And we all here know that there is no such place as away. That doesn't exist. So why are we throwing away usable carbon into the landfills, or worse, the ocean, when the technology exists that is patented today to take that waste, put it through a gasifier, and create usable energy? So I think that I know that humans are capitalistic, and I think that is a fact, and I like using that knowledge to help update our infrastructure into the 21st century. Because investing in the tech that is working today, to me, is better than investing potentially in the tech that might work tomorrow.
So I see that we're running out of time. So sad.
I want to talk about my second Millennial Moonshot.
Yeah, I
Matt, we
think
wanted to take us home.
take us home.
Okay.
And then maybe we have room for one question.
Yeah, I'm sure we do have room for one question. Millennial Moonshot number 2 is that we will achieve gender and racial equality in our lifetimes. And I would tell the story about how I came to that conclusion, but we don't have the time. We could talk to you about it afterwards. But basically, something that you pointed out, Katie, was that one of the things that we need to do is to support young girls' education in developing countries. So if you look at the book Drawdown or Project Drawdown, you'll find that education of young women and also family planning combined is the #1 solution to climate change. So what we really need to do, and I can say personally, I'm not just putting myself on a pedestal. I have, again, for reasons I can explain later, I have made a very concerted effort to uplift women. And don't worry, guys, they uplift you at the same time. That's the whole point. And so, I truly believe, that being said, that uplifting women will ultimately save humanity, in addition to millennials going and voting in 2020.
Matt's so woke.
And you know what that takes? That takes guys, men, especially white men, to take a step back sometimes. And I've already done that. I'll continue to do that. I will, and I hope that other white males in this room will also have the courage to do that, because, supporting women is really, I'm not just saying that because these two amazing women are sitting next to me. Supporting women is really one of the top things we can do to save humanity. And so, and you can start that by supporting these two women on stage and all the wonderful women in the audience, and all the women who are not here today because they had to go home to work. So that's my second moonshot.
Well, I'm going to take, Barclay, don't hate me. I'm going to take one question, then that's the wrap. Ellen.
Yeah.
Oh, so I can't see, by the way, over on this side. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. This was great and fun, and huge kudos to Katie, who I've watched over the years just evolve as an amazing woman. So I think impact investing is crucial, and we're involved in impact investing. I think what we need from the millennial impact investing is to really demand standards. Far too often, impact investments are being driven by the investor. There's no clarity on the rights of the so-called beneficiaries. All too often, they seek maybe market returns, maybe even rapacious returns, not always fair returns. And I think we're in this almost fad-like stage of impact investing. So I want to hear your thoughts about how your generation can help set standards so that we're really doing things in a very transformative way with impact investing and change the power dynamics between the communities and the investors than what has happened in the past. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks. Thanks, Ellen. I'm going to take a quick shot at that.
Take that one.
So one of the things I've noticed, especially within our Nexus community, we have an impact investment working group. We have working groups kind of across issue areas. And one of the things that we've seen is that there is that lack of harmonization of standards, right? We don't have this kind of supranational accounting standards board that's going to enforce that. One thing, though, that I've seen a lot of our generation get really excited about is something that Matt just talked about, which is drawdown, right? So this idea that there are standards, there are opportunities we can invest in, and we can look at benchmarks that are kind of across verticals. And I think that that has been sparking a conversation that's bringing more young people to the table versus ESG, SRI, CSR, every acronym you can think of under the sun that's kind of been built, traditionally by wealth managers in service of their client, right? And I think that our generation, from a movement perspective, especially from the Nexus perspective, we're a nonprofit network. We have the ability, especially with this pledge, to help shape some of what that looks like. And we've found that people respond to drawdown because it is so diversified and it doesn't have the same implications that E, S, and G does, right? So the only response I can really say is that we are looking for opportunities, and if there's a way that we can harmonize how we structure what our opportunities look like, drawdown has been the best architecture for that we've seen, and perhaps we can innovate upon that or start bringing and harmonizing what already exists within the marketplace. And I do think it has to be done by an independent body. I don't think it can be done by one family or even a coalition of families. I think that it has to be something that's above that, and it has to be transpartisan, kind of, and not reaping a benefit monetarily from that standard setting. That's it? Okay.